This is not just a tale of a girl in a tower. It's the sound of longing turned into song, the echo of footsteps that never gave up. A love story, not loud or rushed, but quiet and deep, like the earth holding its breath beneath snow. Tonight, let the story carry you. Not far, just gently, into the world of Rapunzel. Love blossoms. Long, long ago, in a land where the mornings rose wrapped in gentle mist and the evenings settled like lullabies across the hills, there stood a quiet little cottage atop a stone-covered slope. It was a place woven of simplicity and care, built from wood aged by rain and sun, where ivy climbed the corners and wild daisies peeked through the cracks in the steps. In that cottage lived a woodcutter and his wife, a pair whose lives were unremarkable by the world's measure, but rich in the kind of peace only found far from noise and haste. They woke with birdsong, worked with the rhythm of the wind, and rested as the stars took their place each evening. Beyond their home, stretching far and deep, lay a forest dark and vast. It rolled like a green sea through the land, full of old trees and older secrets. And near the forest's farthest edge, hidden behind curtains of hanging ivy and shadowed branches, stood another home, a house whispered about by villagers in fearful tones. There lived a woman who was neither young nor old, neither beautiful nor terrible. She was simply powerful. No one knew quite who she was. Some called her an enchantress, others a sorceress. What they all agreed upon, however, was the legend of her garden. That garden was the envy of every field and forest. It shimmered with color that defied language. Flowers that bloomed in blue deeper than the sky, petals as soft as cloud, herbs that breathed faint light, and fruit that seemed kissed by stars. It was a place of mystery and beauty and magic, and it was forbidden. No one dared venture near, for they said the garden was alive with enchantment, and the woman who tended it saw all who entered, no matter how quietly they crept. But from the window of the little cottage, the garden was visible, just barely. And as seasons passed and the woodcutter's wife grew heavy with child, her eyes more often turned toward that distant patch of paradise. Their own land bore nothing. The soil, stubborn and rocky, refused even the simplest sprouts. No herbs grew, no blossoms dared. Only weeds, dry wind, and the whisper of things not meant to grow. And so she watched, day after day, hand resting on her round belly, watching the impossible garden far below. Then, one golden evening, as the light settled like honey upon the treetops, she saw it. A patch of rampion, green, deep, and vibrant, with blossoms of violet swaying gently in the late breeze. A longing took root in her heart, sharp, sudden, and oddly sorrowful. It wasn't hunger in the usual sense. It was deeper than that, as though her spirit recognized something in that plant that her body needed, that her child might be calling for without words. That night, she could not sleep. She turned on her side, then her back, closed her eyes, only to see the velvet leaves swaying behind them. Even the crickets seemed to echo its name. The craving had settled inside her like a silent ache, gentle but unyielding. The woodcutter noticed the shadows beneath her eyes, the way her voice drifted like mist when she spoke. And though she said nothing at first, he understood. He had heard the stories. The enchantress's garden was not a place to be entered lightly. But he loved her. Quietly, completely, in the way that only long years and deep bonds could teach. So when the sky turned lavender and the first stars began their watch, he wrapped himself in his old cloak and set off, guided not by courage, but by love. The garden wall was not so high. Moss softened its edges, and wild roses crept over its sides, their petals untouched by thorn. The woodcutter climbed gently, pausing once at the top to listen to the hush of the night. The moon glowed above, round and silver, casting light upon the garden as though blessing the path he was about to take. Inside, the garden pulsed with stillness. The air was cooler here, fragrant with things not found in the outside world. He moved silently, each step upon earth that seemed to hum beneath his boots. He reached the rampion patch quickly. The leaves were cool under his touch. The blossoms, still swaying though no wind stirred, released a soft, clean scent, earthy and fresh, like the first breath of spring. He gathered a small handful, careful not to tear more than needed, then climbed back over the wall and returned home. The rampion bundled carefully in his satchel. His wife's eyes filled with tears when he gave it to her. She prepared it with trembling hands and ate slowly, savoring each bite. And when she slept that night, her rest was peaceful, her breath soft and even. But as often happens with longing, one taste only deepened the desire. The next night, she wept softly into her pillow, unable to say more than a few words. But he already knew. The ache had returned. He said nothing. He simply rose, took his cloak, and left again. The second journey felt heavier, even though the path was the same. And this time, as his fingers brushed the rampion once more, something stirred. A sudden chill swept through the air, unnatural, still. The trees ceased their rustle. The garden, moments before so fragrant, held its breath. Then, a voice, low, cold, ancient. It did not need to be loud. The woodcutter turned slowly. She stood beneath the moonlight, her silhouette tall and still. Her cloak flowed like night itself. Her eyes, glowing with quiet fire, held no surprise. Only knowing, only quiet judgment. Time stopped around them. The rampion slipped from his hands. He fell to his knees, his voice caught in his chest. No plea could match the weight of her silence. But still, he spoke. From love, from desperation, from guilt. And the enchantress listened. For a long while, she said nothing. Then softly, too softly, she offered a bargain. He would be forgiven. The garden would not punish him. But in return, when the child was born, it would be hers. There were no flames, no dramatic proclamations, only quiet acceptance. A nod, a heart broken in silence. And the moon, high and pale above, slid slowly across the sky, watching as promises were made. Not in words alone, but in the still air between them. The seasons turned softly. As autumn faded into winter, snow began to fall, light as lace, settling upon rooftops, treetops, and the sloping hill where a small wooden cottage glowed like a lantern in the dusk. Icicles clung to its windows, catching light like frozen tears. The fire crackled low, casting long shadows across wooden beams, and the smell of pine, ash, and quiet hope hung gently in the air. And on a night when the world lay still beneath a blanket of silver snow, the child was born. She entered the world in silence, without fuss or cry. Her eyes opened wide, clear and blue as the morning sky after rain. Her skin held the pale softness of snow, and her hair, barely more than a breath upon her head, shimmered gold in the firelight. The woodcutter and his wife, held her with trembling arms, overcome with wonder. They named her Rapunzel, for the plant that had awakened a longing so deep it changed the course of their lives. And as they whispered her name for the first time, the snow continued to fall outside, quiet and steady, like the ticking of a great, slow clock. But as with all beautiful things born of fragile moments, joy did not linger long. Before the stars had dimmed and before dawn could paint the sky with light, a knock came at the door, soft, cold, and certain. It did not thunder. It did not shout. Yet it rang through the cottage, like the sound of fate arriving. The woodcutter opened the door with hands that had once chopped trees, but now shook like wind-blown leaves. And there she stood, the enchantress. Wrapped in robes of midnight and mist, she stepped forward, her eyes unreadable, her presence silencing the very flames of the hearth. She said nothing, no demand, no reminder, no curse, only stillness. She reached forward, and the child, nestled in her mother's arms, stirred, then settled. Without resistance, without sound, she was lifted gently into the enchantress's arms, not unkindly, but without warmth. And just as quietly as she had arrived, the enchantress turned and vanished into the snow-covered world, into the forest, into the fog, leaving behind only silence and a cradle that would never again be filled. Far away from hills and cottages, past winding rivers and sleeping groves, hidden deep within the ancient folds of the forest, there stood a tower. It rose alone in a glade that never saw footprints, wrapped in ivy and forgetfulness. There was no road leading to it. No birds flew near. Its walls, made of pale gray stone, stood tall and smooth, worn soft by wind and time. No door welcomed visitors. No staircase wound within. Only one small window, high at the top, looked out into the sky. This tower would become the child's world. The enchantress carried Rapunzel there and placed her gently inside. The walls were bare stone, the air cool and dim. Yet in this space, untouched by noise or danger, she believed the child would be safe. Here, sorrow could not find her, nor longing, nor change. Time inside the tower moved like honey, slow and golden. Rapunzel did not know the world outside. Her feet never touched grass, her hands never dug into soil. Yet she grew, quietly, beautifully, like a flower that blooms only at night. Her lullabies were not sung to her, but to the wind. Her stories were not told, but imagined in whispers that echoed off the walls. And the only person she ever saw was the one who brought her food, cloth, and combs. The enchantress, known to her only as Mother Gothel. Gothel came each day without warning and left just as silently. She spoke little, gave what was needed, and withdrew. There were no good-night kisses, no laughter shared, only the routine of arrival and departure. The click of a basket placed on stone, the hush of footsteps fading down the tower wall. Yet Rapunzel did not wither. She grew tall and graceful, her presence soft like candlelight. Her hair, golden from birth, lengthened as the seasons passed. It gleamed like spun sunlight, curling and falling across the cold floor like a river that had forgotten how to rush. Each morning, she sat at the high window and brushed it, long and slow, until it shimmered in the light. The birds came to listen. They did not land nor sing back, but they circled close when she sang. Her voice rose like smoke from a chimney, slow and pure. She did not know where the songs came from, only that they filled her, the way dreams fill sleep. They slipped from her lips like petals, soft and endless. Though she had never seen a town, never touched a river, never walked a single path beyond the round stone of her tower. Still she dreamed. She dreamed of skies wider than her window, of colors not found in her embroidery threads, of hands she had not yet held. Sometimes, as evening fell and shadows stretched long across the floor, she would press her cheek to the cold stone frame and gaze beyond the trees. On certain days, when the light curved just so and the wind whispered just right, she believed she saw something far away, glimmers of rooftops, perhaps, or a silvery ribbon of river. But it was always too far, and the tower always too high. Still, something in her stirred, a quiet question, a silent yearning, not for escape, but for knowing. And when she once whispered into the dusk, "Is there more?" Though no voice replied, the wind curled gently around her face, as if to say yes. Each evening, as day softened into night, Gothel returned. There was no door to knock upon, so she stood beneath the window and called, half in chant, half in song, words that echoed through the clearing like a spell. "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." And from above, the golden braid fell, like a bridge spun from light and love. Gothel climbed, hand over hand, slow and certain, as if the braid were both rope and ritual. She would reach the window, step inside, and do what needed to be done. Then she would leave, and Rapunzel, alone once more, would sit in her circle of light, the silence folding gently around her once again. And the tower would sleep. It was late spring, the kind of spring where the air is warm without weight, and sunlight pools beneath trees like gold scattered from the heavens. The forest was alive in a hush, a tender silence, where even the birds seemed to sing more softly, as though the world itself were listening. A young prince rode alone that day, far from the palace walls and the heavy velvet of royal halls. His horse trotted gently along a trail long forgotten, where moss grew between ancient roots and wildflowers nodded as he passed. The forest welcomed him, not with fanfare, but with calm. He was not seeking anything in particular, not a hunt, not glory, only the stillness of trees and the rhythm of hooves on soft earth. The weight of crowns and counsel had grown tiresome, and here, beneath the canopy, he was no one, only a man surrounded by the kindness of leaves. The deeper he rode, the more the world faded into green and gold. He let the reins slacken, trusting the path, his eyes drifting skyward where branches arched above him like cathedral ceilings made of light. And then, something caught the air. A sound, faint and floating, like mist above morning fields. Not a sound meant to be heard, but one that escaped gently, as if from a dream. It was a voice, software pure, rising and falling with the wind, like birdsong spun into music. The prince stopped. He listened, and the forest seemed to pause with him. The song carried no words, but it spoke to something within him nonetheless. It wound through the branches and curled around his heart like a ribbon. There was no pain in it, no sorrow, but it was not joy either. It was something deeper, a kind of longing shaped in melody. He dismounted in silence and stepped among the trees, following the music like a thread drawn through air. The trail narrowed, the leaves thickened, and the light shifted to greenish gold. With each step, the song grew clearer, not louder, but nearer. Then the trees parted. A clearing opened before him, sun-drenched and still. And there, rising from the very earth like something planted long ago and forgotten by time, stood a tower. It was tall, taller than any tree in sight. Its stone was worn smooth by years of rain and sun, wrapped in ivy like a gift never opened. No door marked its base. No path led to its foot. Only one window high above, framed against the sky. From that window, the song poured like light. And in that window stood a girl. She was still as the breeze, her eyes closed, her face tilted gently toward the sky. Her hair, long and golden, spilled around her like sunlight poured from a pitcher. It caught the light, shimmered in soft waves, and floated on the wind like silken threads unwinding from a dream. She sang not to be heard. She sang because the song lived within her. The prince stood at the edge of the clearing, heart stilled by wonder. He had seen many faces, many forms of beauty, but nothing like this. Nothing so untouched, so quiet and full of light. In that moment, he felt as though he had stepped not into a forest, but into a story. And somehow, he was meant to be part of it. He took one quiet step forward, and the song ended. The girl opened her eyes, startled, and vanished from the window like a flame blown out by the wind. The prince remained where he was, unsure whether to smile or weep. He circled the tower once, searching gently, thoughtfully. There was no entrance, no ladder, no sign of anyone ever having come or gone. Only the quiet stone in the window above. Still, something in him told him not to turn away. He returned the next day, and the day after that. Each time he came when the sun was low and the light was warm, when the shadows were long and the air carried memories in its folds. He waited, hoping for a glimpse, for a note of song, a flicker of golden hair. But the window remained empty, silent, until one evening, as he stood hidden among the trees, he heard the crunch of leaves behind him. A figure emerged, a silhouette cloaked in dusk, her steps soft, her presence more shadow than shape. She moved toward the tower. He watched, and then he heard it. The same words, spoken like a spell the forest had always known. Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair. The name, carried by that voice, rang through the clearing like a bell underwater. And then, from the window above, a braid appeared, golden, long, swaying like a ribbon descending from the sky. It reached the ground with a hush. The woman took hold of the braid and began to climb, slowly and gracefully, vanishing into the window high above. The prince stayed hidden, and when, at last, she descended and disappeared once more into the trees, he stepped forward. His hands trembled, not with fear, but with something far softer, hope. He looked up to the window, now still again. The air around him felt full of breathless possibility. He stepped closer to the tower's base, tilted his face skyward, and spoke not as a prince, not even as a man, but as someone who had heard a song and could no longer live without knowing its source. No answer came at first. Then, the braid fell once more, golden, glimmering, a thread drawn down from the heavens. He reached for it, and with reverent care, as if touching a prayer made of light, he began to climb. The climb was gentle, like a secret shared between stone and wind. The golden braid, warmed by the sun and scented faintly of wildflowers, swayed in the soft hush of evening. It did not resist him. Instead, it welcomed him with the quiet assurance of something sacred, soft as petals, strong as hope. With each movement upward, the world below slipped away, and with it, the noise and weight of everything he had ever known. Higher and higher, until the trees seemed small and the forest became a hush beneath him. He climbed, not toward conquest or discovery, but toward a presence that had pulled at his heart with every note she had unknowingly sung. When he reached the window, the hush deepened. There she was. She stood in the fading light like a dream made real. Delicate, unsure, yet steady in the way of things that had been waiting quietly for their time. Her hands rested lightly on the stone ledge, her golden hair pooling around her like liquid sunlight. Her eyes, wide and luminous, held not fear, but wonder. Wonder that mirrored his own. She had not expected a stranger. And yet, something inside her did not retreat. He said nothing, nor did she. Between them stretched the kind of silence that needed no words, the kind that settles gently between hearts already beginning to understand one another. Outside, the twilight deepened, wrapping the tower in a veil of peace. From that day forward, he returned each evening as the sky turned to rose and gold. And each time, the braid would descend, and she would wait. Hands light, heart full. They spoke, but never hurried. Their words flowed like a quiet stream, weaving stories not just from books and skies and bird songs, but from the spaces they began to share. He told her of the world he knew, fields that danced with poppies, rivers that sang as they curved through valleys, stars that fell in silence and granted wishes. She listened with parted lips, as though each image painted color across the gray stone of her world. In turn, she spoke of moments small and tender, the sound of birds resting at her window, the way the wind sometimes carried dreams into her sleep, the feel of stone warmed by sun, and the hush of night pressing against her tower walls. He listened with the reverence of one hearing poetry born from solitude. Time began to melt around them. The tower, once a place of stillness and silence, began to pulse with the soft rhythm of two hearts learning each other. The space between them narrowed, not by steps, but by breath, by shared glances, by the golden hush that falls when love takes root, not in haste, but in wonder. They did not speak of love. They lived it, in the way her hand lingered on the window frame as he climbed, in the way his gaze softened when he saw her silhouette framed by starlight, in the way their silences became songs. And one evening, as dusk wrapped the world in velvet blue, he drew from his cloak a bundle. It was silk, fine, light, and strong. Not much by itself, but he had brought a little more each day. And now, there was enough. She took it gently, her fingers brushing his with unspoken promise. There was no rush. Instead, there was intention. She began to braid, and with each twist of thread, she wove the quiet strength of her longing, the warmth of her hope, and the gentle fire of a love that had bloomed without announcement. He spoke of the world they might walk together. Not castles or crowns, but wide skies and rivers that ran like laughter. Meadows where the wind played with tall grass, and woods where birds would sing to them from hidden boughs. A life with no towers, no locks, only freedom. She smiled, not with her lips, but with her whole being. She did not need to answer. It was already known. They sat then, close without touching, as stars blinked open above. The braid lay between them, not finished, but begun. When the time came for him to descend, she lowered the braid slowly, carefully. He held it like something precious. And as he reached the forest floor, he looked up. She was still there, silhouetted in the window, framed in twilight and quiet longing. One hand lifted in farewell. The other rested over her heart. No words were spoken, but both carried a single thought. Soon, the days passed like petals drifting on a slow-moving stream. In the quiet of each evening, Rapunzel worked with delicate hands, weaving strands of silk into something more than a ladder, something born of dreams and longing. Each thread she braided held a heartbeat, a hope, a gentle promise. Though her fingers moved steadily, her thoughts floated elsewhere, down into the world her heart had imagined 1,000 times, yet never touched. Each night, the prince came with more silk, tucked away in the folds of his cloak like a secret offering. He came not only bearing thread, but light, the warmth of laughter, the softness of stories, the tenderness of someone who saw her not as a captive, but as someone radiant and real. And each time he left, climbing back down the golden braid and vanishing into the forest's shadowed hush, she would place her hand over her chest and whisper a single word, soft as breath. Soon, but not all moments stay wrapped in magic forever, and not all evenings are kind. One twilight, with the light still soft on the stones, and the memory of the prince's voice lingering like perfume, the wind grew still. Mother Gothel came earlier than expected, her footsteps soundless, her presence like frost beneath the door. The forest held its breath, and even the leaves seemed unwilling to stir. She emerged from the shadows in silence, her dark cloak trailing like smoke, her gaze sharp and searching. At the foot of the tower, her voice rose, not loud but cutting, the edges of each word fine as glass. Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair. And the braid fell, as it always did, golden, shimmering, soft. But today, something had changed. As she climbed, her keen eyes caught the glint of silver among the gold. Tiny threads, foreign threads, thread not of this place, not of her design. She said nothing. Yet, at the window, Rapunzel turned to greet her with a smile so full of light that even the bare stones behind her seemed to soften. She welcomed her with gentleness, unaware of the growing storm behind those eyes that had once watched over her. Gothel's voice was sweet, too sweet. She offered berries, still warm, she said, from the sun. And Rapunzel accepted them with gratitude, her heart still carrying the echo of a prince's laughter. But Gothel watched, measured, waited. Then, with a voice light as silk and sharp as thorn, she asked if anything had changed. Rapunzel's hands stilled. Her heart skipped. And though her lips answered no, her voice trembled like a leaf caught in a coming storm. Gothel stepped closer. Her questions grew colder, her eyes sharper. She reached out, and with practiced fingers pulled a length of hair near the window. And with it, a sliver of something that did not belong. Silk, not hers. The truth was revealed not by words, but by thread. Anger did not roar. It whispered. It burned slow and low. Gothel's voice, now quiet as snowfall, carried more weight than thunder. The word liar fell like a stone. Rapunzel rose, fear blooming in her chest. She tried to speak, but the air around them had grown too thin. There was no room for explanations, no time for forgiveness. The enchantress's wrath was silent, but it moved like wind before a storm. She reached into her cloak and drew out a silver blade, not for harm, but for severing. And with one swift motion, the braid fell. Golden hair coiled like sunlight turned to ash. Rapunzel, newly shorn, stood motionless, the sudden lightness on her head, nothing compared to the heaviness in her heart. Gothel clutched the braid, not with affection, but with fury disguised as triumph. The magic surged. The stones themselves seemed to hum with power as she raised her arms. Light flared, not bright, but final. And then, with a whisper of wind, Rapunzel was gone, vanished. carried off into exile. The tower stood empty. The braid lay alone on the cold stone floor, still warm where it had once touched the cheek of a girl who had dared to dream. That night, the forest stirred uneasily. Branches creaked without wind. The moon hid behind veils of cloud. And the prince returned. He came as always, silk in hand, hope in his heart. He stood at the base of the tower and called softly into the dusk, his voice filled with a joy he did not yet know he'd lost. The braid descended. He smiled. He climbed. But at the top, the window did not open to Rapunzel. It opened to shadow. Gothel's face emerged, twisted with cruel delight. The prince's joy shattered. She spoke not with rage, but with something colder. Her words landed like frost. "She is gone." He staggered. And then, in silence, he let go. He fell, not like a warrior, not like a fool, but like a wish dropped into darkness. The trees did not break his fall. The thorns wept in silence, and the night closed its eyes. Above, the tower returned to silence. But the story was not yet over. The days passed like petals drifting on a slow-moving stream. In the quiet of each evening, Rapunzel worked with delicate hands, weaving strands of silk into something more than a ladder. Something born of dreams and longing. Each thread she braided held a heartbeat, a hope, a gentle promise. Though her fingers moved steadily, her thoughts floated elsewhere. Down into the world her heart had imagined 1,000 times, yet never touched. Each night, the prince came with more silk, tucked away in the folds of his cloak like a secret offering. He came not only bearing thread, but light. The warmth of laughter, the softness of stories, the tenderness of someone who saw her not as a captive, but as someone radiant and real. And each time he left, climbing back down the golden braid and vanishing into the forest's shadowed hush, she would place her hand over her chest and whisper a single word, soft as breath. Soon, but not all moments stay wrapped in magic forever. And not all evenings are kind. One twilight, with the light still soft on the stones, and the memory of the prince's voice lingering like perfume, the wind grew still. Mother Gothel came earlier than expected, her footsteps soundless, her presence like frost beneath the door. The forest held its breath, and even the leaves seemed unwilling to stir. She emerged from the shadows in silence, her dark cloak trailing like smoke, her gaze sharp and searching. At the foot of the tower, her voice rose, not loud but cutting, the edges of each word fine as glass. "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." And the braid fell, as it always did, golden, shimmering, soft. But today, something had changed. As she climbed, her keen eyes caught the glint of silver among the gold. Tiny threads, foreign threads. Thread not of this place, not of her design. She said nothing. Yet, at the window, Rapunzel turned to greet her with a smile. A smile so full of light that even the bare stones behind her seemed to soften. She welcomed her with gentleness, unaware of the growing storm behind those eyes that had once watched over her. Gothel's voice was sweet, too sweet. She offered berries, still warm, she said, from the sun. And Rapunzel accepted them with gratitude, her heart still carrying the echo of a prince's laughter. But Gothel watched, measured, waited. Then, with a voice light as silk and sharp as thorn, she asked if anything had changed. Rapunzel's hands stilled. Her heart skipped. And though her lips answered no, her voice trembled like a leaf caught in a coming storm. Gothel stepped closer. Her questions grew colder, her eyes sharper. She reached out, and with practiced fingers pulled a length of hair near the window, and with it, a sliver of something that did not belong. Silk, not hers. The truth was revealed not by words, but by thread. Anger did not roar. It whispered. It burned slow and low. Gothel's voice, now quiet as snowfall, carried more weight than thunder. The word liar fell like a stone. Rapunzel rose, fear blooming in her chest. She tried to speak, but the air around them had grown too thin. There was no room for explanations, no time for forgiveness. The enchantress's wrath was silent, but it moved like wind before a storm. She reached into her cloak and drew out a silver blade, not for harm, but for severing. And with one swift motion, the braid fell. Golden hair coiled like sunlight turned to ash. Rapunzel, newly shorn, stood motionless, the sudden lightness on her head nothing compared to the heaviness in her heart. Gothel clutched the braid, not with affection, but with fury disguised as triumph. The magic surged. The stones themselves seemed to hum with power as she raised her arms. Light flared, not bright, but final. And then, with a whisper of wind, Rapunzel was gone, vanished, carried off into exile. The tower stood empty. The braid lay alone on the cold stone floor, still warm where it had once touched the cheek of a girl who had dared to dream. That night, the forest stirred uneasily. Branches creaked without wind. The moon hid behind veils of cloud. And the prince returned. He came as always, silk in hand, hope in his heart. He stood at the base of the tower and called softly into the dusk, his voice filled with a joy he did not yet know he'd lost. The braid descended. He smiled. He climbed. But at the top, the window did not open to Rapunzel. It opened to shadow. Gothel's face emerged, twisted with cruel delight. The prince's joy shattered. She spoke not with rage, but with something colder. Her words landed like frost. She is gone. He staggered. And then, in silence, he let go. He fell, not like a warrior, not like a fool, but like a wish dropped into darkness. The trees did not break his fall. The thorns wept in silence, and the night closed its eyes. Above, the tower returned to silence. But the story was not yet over. The forest grew silent after the fall. Even the wind, once playful, had forgotten its song. The golden braid dangled from the tower like a ribbon of memory, swaying gently in the hush, but no voice called down to greet it. No hands reached out from the high window. And below, where the thorns lay thick and cruel, the prince lay still. Time slipped by unnoticed, an hour, perhaps more. Then, softly, a breath stirred the undergrowth. He lived. Though broken and bloodied, though his cloak was torn and his limbs heavy with pain, something within him had not shattered, but his eyes. They had been taken by the thorns. The light was gone. The sky above no longer belonged to him. Stars now lived only in memory. His cry was not one of agony, but of loss. Rapunzel. Her name, his lifeline. He remained in that cradle of shadow for a day, maybe more. The sun came and went, and the trees above watched without judgment as he wept. Yet life held him gently, refusing to let go. And so, one morning, guided by memory and love, he stood. He wandered without path, driven only by the echo of her voice and the warmth she had once left in his arms. He moved slowly, stumbling. The forest scratched him. The thorns tore, but still he pressed on. He drank from cool streams by sound alone, fed himself with berries plucked in hope, and slept beneath trees that whispered lullabies like those she used to hum. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Sometimes he thought he heard her in the bird song. Sometimes he reached out, thinking he had found her hand. But always, it was wind and bark and silence. Still, he called her name, softly, tenderly, like prayer. Rapunzel. The seasons changed around him. The forest thinned, hills rose, then fields. Then, at last, a desert, wide and still, where even the sky seemed to forget how to speak. And far from the tower, in that quiet wasteland, Rapunzel lived. Gothel had cast her to the edge of the world. The sun burned without mercy. The nights held no song. Yet Rapunzel endured. She built herself shelter from driftwood and hope. She dug deep for water. She sang to the stars. Her songs were soft. They carried longing and love. They told of a prince with gentle eyes and hands that held nothing but wonder. They told of silk and stars and golden laughter. She did not know if anyone heard. Still, she sang. And one day, as the sky began to burn with dusk, a voice answered. It was hoarse, cracked, but it knew her name. Rapunzel. She turned, breath stolen from her chest. Across the sand a figure came, worn, dust-covered, blind. But she knew. Before his voice, before his face, she knew. She ran, barefoot, breathless, weeping. She ran until the world blurred, and then she was in his arms. He held her, shaking. I knew you were real, he whispered. Even in the dark, I remembered the light. She touched his cheeks, kissed his brow, and when her tears fell onto his face, something shifted. The light returned, slowly, like dawn breaking through heavy mist. He blinked and saw her, truly saw her, and smiled. They cried, but not from grief, from wonder. That night, beneath open stars, they slept not in a tower, not in a cage, but beneath the sky, with only love to guard them. And when morning rose, they stood, hand in hand. They walked toward a new world, toward meadows and rivers and freedom, toward home. Together, they walked for many days, side by side, through wind-blown sands and sunlit meadows, over hills crowned with heather and beneath skies that blushed with the rising dawn. Their steps were slow but steady, and wherever they passed, the world seemed to soften. Birds followed them. Trees bent slightly as if to listen. Even the streams murmured a sweeter song. The prince, no longer lost, no longer blind, kept her hand in his always. He was not a man returning home, alone. He was returning with his heart. And Rapunzel, free at last from the tower's cold stone and the enchantress's shadow, bloomed like spring in a girl's smile. Her voice, once caged behind walls, now floated freely over fields and skies, drifting with the clouds like petals in the breeze. One morning, they stood on a hill that overlooked a valley of silver mist. And there, rising from the land like a promise kept, stood the castle. It was grand, yes, but not in the way that dazzled or bragged. Its towers shone with kindness, its gardens hummed with life, and its windows sparkled not from jewels, but from warmth. Home. They entered the gates together. The people bowed in wonder, for many had thought the prince lost forever. But when they saw the golden-haired girl at his side and the way he looked at her, like morning light on water, they knew something truer than any tale had come to pass. In time, the castle became a place of laughter and music. The gardens were planted with flowers Rapunzel had only ever seen in dreams, lavender and wild roses, daisies and bluebells. The birds she had sung to from her tower returned, nesting in the trees and waking the castle each day with gentle song. A room was built with no roof, just open sky above. where Rapunzel could sleep under stars the way she always had in her mind. She did not miss the tower, but sometimes, when twilight crept in and the fireflies rose, she would light a single candle by her window and hum the lullabies that once echoed through stone. And always, the prince would come to her side, rest his head on her shoulder, and listen. They did not rush to marry. Instead, they spent their days learning each other, what made the other laugh, what stories lived in the corners of their minds. He taught her how to ride a horse, how to skip stones across lakes. She taught him how to listen to silence, how to feel the breeze and know which way the season was turning. Their love was quiet and deep, like a tree growing slowly through stone, strong and steady. And when at last they did marry, it was beneath the canopy of the forest where they first heard each other's voices. No crown was placed, no trumpet sounded, only the rustle of leaves and the sigh of the wind as they whispered their vows. "I choose you," he said, "in all seasons, in all skies." "And I choose you," she replied, "in all songs, in all stories yet to come." Years passed. The kingdom flourished, not with wealth, but with kindness. No tower was ever built again without a door, and no girl was ever left to dream alone in silence. Children would gather in the evenings by Rapunzel's garden, where she would sing soft tales and braid their hair with blossoms. Her voice still held the golden glow of sunlight, and some swore the stars leaned closer when she sang. And when the prince looked at her, even after many winters had come and gone, his eyes still held the same wonder as that very first night, when he heard a voice in the forest and followed it into forever. So if you ever walk through an old forest and hear a song on the breeze, soft, low, and full of longing, it might just be the echo of a story that once was, of a tower without doors, of a girl with sunlight in her hair, and of a boy who followed love, even when he could no longer see, and found her just the same.